You notice we didn't ask people to rank things. It's well known that people are not very good at ranking lists. They don't tend to pay attention, particularly in the middle when things get difficult. So we exploited this and just asked people about the top and bottom, the best and worst. And this type of choice experiment was invented by Jordan Louviere and is being used internationally in a variety of areas now. It's called best-worst scaling, and there are a few references here for those who are interested. What we're trying to do is to elicit each respondent's norms, their values, and essentially place on a measuring scale all these various impairments so we can compare them and see how bad or good they are compared to one another. So how bad is social isolation, for instance, relative to impaired independence? How bad is severe worries about the future relative to being unable to do things that make you feel valued? Those are the kind of difficult decisions that we're trying to inform from the choice model. Okay, we did the valuation exercise and we got some results, and these reflect the average values, the average norms of British older people. And in terms of interpreting this, we can simply look at the bars for the 4 levels for each of the 5 dimensions. So for instance, this would be our lookup table. It's a set of off-the-shelf scores that we can apply to summarize a person's tick box answers. So if somebody ticked that they were experiencing the top level for all 5 dimensions, we'd be adding the blue bars, and they have the particular property. If you add them up, they sum to 1, 100%. If somebody were ticking that they were in the bottom level, in a very unfortunate life, for each of the 5 dimensions, we'd be adding the red bars, and they sum to 0. All the other potential states that are defined by the tick box answers lie somewhere in between. But it's interesting that not all impairments are valued the same. Having no independence is the worst thing that could happen to you. Having all the love and friendship you want is the best thing. And indeed, even the 3rd level of attachment, having most of it, is still better than the top level of the other 4 dimensions. So these people are really bothered about relationships, and they're really bothered about losing their independence. Those 2 dimensions punch above their weight. They each account for around 25% of quality of life, and the other 3 dimensions have been squashed as a result, because these have the properties that they must sum to 100%, and these are the relative preferences people have for these. Moving from the 4th to the 3rd level doesn't really generally impose a big impairment on quality of life. The distance tends to be quite small. Security is the only one for which that is not true, and that's because it's qualitatively different. We're going from no worries to some worries. So we were expecting a larger decrement there. So we can use these as off-the-shelf scores to apply a person's tick box answers and summarize, value how good or bad their life is, as seen through the eyes of a British older person. Slightly strange concept, but it does mean that we have a common denominator here. There's no potential for my rating scale answer to be different from yours due to a different way of answering it. We're applying the same set of values to people's measured responses to the 5 dimensions. So how would we use this? Well, we've used it in trials and surveys. The first clinical trial it was used in was a trial of joint replacement in Scotland. People had a hip or knee replacement. They filled in IceCap O before they had the operation. They filled it again a year post-operatively. And we applied these values to their tick box answers, so we could essentially look at the percentage quality of life score pre-operatively and 1 year post-operatively. And this was the first test in longitudinal data of the IceCap O measure. And we were chuffed to see that despite a relatively modest sample size, we had statistically significant improvements, not only overall in quality of life, but in the 4 dimensions that we expected there to be some improvement in quality of life. There was 1 dimension we were not convinced we'd see any change in, and we didn't. Anyone have any guesses which one it is? Shout out, someone. Roll? Any other answers? Attachment, yes. There was no change in the attachment scores. We didn't really see any good reason why there should be, unless anyone was widowed, for instance. We weren't expecting any major changes there, and indeed there wasn't. But there were improvements on all the other 4 dimensions. We also administered IceCap-O, which, although was developed for older people initially, it's interesting that 4 of the 5 dimensions correspond quite closely to the fundamental human needs that psychologists talk about. And we hadn't yet developed IceCap-A for all adults, and so we only had IceCap-O to go on. But we administered it in the Bristol survey, and it was quite interesting that we were able to then look at average quality of life scores in the 35